So we've got the release of the egg, fertilization taking place inside the fallopian tube, and then we've got the mitosis, the cleavage event forming the morula, and then that starts to move forward. We got the beginning of differentiation, the production of the inner cell mass here, the trophoblastic layer here, and then we've got this cavity in the center. That makes it the blastocyst. And around about day 7, day 8, what's going to happen is the blastocyst is going to release digestive enzymes which are going to eat their way through the endometrium. So this endometrium has been primed already for implantation because of the actions of the steroid hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And interestingly, the endometrium is a very unusual tissue, because what will happen is as the blastocyst makes these enzymes and literally digests its way through the endometrium, there will be a point reached where that process stops. So the endometrium itself has got some kind of, which is not very well understood, some kind of feature which prevents the digestion from continuing, because if it did continue, it would go through the smooth muscle, the myometrium, and that would cause hemorrhage. So the endometrium is a very special tissue, and the endometrium is where the blastocyst will implant into. And here we've got a reminder of the importance of HCG that we've talked about when we looked at Unit 6. So the embryo itself is going to implant into the endometrium here, and the endometrium is maintained by high levels of progesterone. So you cannot have levels of progesterone falling down. So if the corpus luteum, which normally produces the progesterone, breaks down, then the progesterone levels will fall, and if the progesterone levels fall, we get menstrual bleeding and a miscarriage taking place. So the corpus luteum is normally kept alive by LH, but LH itself is going to be decreased because high levels of progesterone do negative feedback and switch off the production of LH at the pituitary gland. So what happens is that the embryo will produce a new chemical, a new hormone, which is referred to as HCG, human chorionic gonadotrophin, structurally, biochemically very, very similar to LH. And HCG released from the embryo itself will circulate in the blood, and it will attach itself to the corpus luteum, maintaining the corpus luteum, maintaining the production of progesterone, and preventing the breakdown of the endometrium. HCG, remember, is, as Jennifer reminded us last week, is what we test for in pregnancy testing kits using monoclonal antibodies. So again, there's a connection that could exist for assays just here. So this slide is essentially just repeating what we've already said. So we've got the zygote, the morula, and the blastocyst. This is very, very well worth playing as an animation to make it clear about what those processes are involved with. And this one, again, is just touching on the idea of HCG and what happens and its relation to the menstrual cycle just here. So use these slides to enable you to build up a good set of notes. This one comes from BioNinja, and BioNinja is talking about how the placenta has a role in the 3 trimesters of pregnancy. So human pregnancy is approximately 9 months. So the first trimester is the first 3 months. And what we can see in the first 3 months are high levels of HCG, and the high levels of HCG are released from the embryo. The embryo then is going to cause the corpus luteum to produce progesterone and estrogen. So these levels are increasing under the action of HCG attaching itself to the corpus luteum. In the second and the third trimester, you get the development of the placenta, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail just now. And the placenta itself takes over the role of producing progesterone and estrogen. So the placenta itself, amongst a number of functions, has got an endocrine function. So levels of HCG start to fall down here. One of the reasons that sometimes miscarriages take place is that the placenta is not sufficiently developed to produce and maintain these progesterone and estrogen levels. If that falls down too quickly, then that does lead to a miscarriage. So let's start to think about the structure and the function of the placenta. I like this diagram because it kind of gives you this idea of a 3 dimensions. So we've got the outside here. This is the myometrium, the muscle layer of the endometrium, of the uterus. Then we've got the endometrium, which is this part in here, which is female. Now, as well as that, what we've got here is the fetus. Coming from the fetus, you've got this, what is called the umbilical cord. And at the end of the umbilical cord, this stuff in blue here is fetal tissue. So remember we talked about the trophoblast, which was the outside layer, the extra embryonic tissue of the blastocyst. One of the functions is to develop what these are called here, which are chorionic villi. And so the chorionic villi are going to extend and dip into the maternal endometrium. So what we've got in this layer here is the placenta, this disc-shaped structure, which is made up of fetal tissue, extra embryonic fetal tissue, notably the chorionic villi. And we've also got the endometrium, which is the female tissue here. So it's an extremely unusual organ because it contains tissues from two genetically different organisms. And what we've got coming through this umbilical cord is the umbilical artery. The umbilical artery goes to the placenta, and the umbilical vein comes from the placenta. Now, be careful, because the umbilical artery is coming to the placenta, and when it's at the placenta, it's picking up oxygen, the umbilical artery is deoxygenated. So it's a little bit like the pulmonary artery. It's an unusual artery. It goes to an organ. The organ is the placenta, but it's deoxygenated rather than oxygenated, which is what most arteries are. So this tells us straight away that one of the roles of the placenta is for gas exchange, and the placenta is acting as the fetal lung. So the placenta is here, and this is the umbilical cord. Don't get muddled up between the two things. So the placenta is this disc-shaped disc-shaped organ, which is made up of fetal and maternal tissue. One of the functions is to act as the fetal lung. There are a variety of other functions that we'll look at just a second. So you've got this umbilical artery coming in here. It dips into and comes into close contact with the mother's blood. So the mother's blood is here, and these chorionic villi are finger-like projections, but they're membranous, so they separate the mother's blood, which is outside in the endometrium, and the fetal blood, which are in these capillaries just here. I've added this diagram because I think it's quite interesting for you to see. This is a real fetus. You can also see the outside here, which is the amnion. One of the other features of the trophoblast is to produce what's referred to as the amniotic sac. And the amniotic sac or amniotic membrane produces amniotic fluid. And the amniotic fluid inside here is going to keep that baby buoyant. So when the mother is moving around, the baby's not rattling about. And so all of this is implanted inside the endometrium of the female. Here is something called the yolk sac, which is very reduced, also extra embryonic tissue, which is not so important. It's kind of a vestigial structure as far as the human is concerned. But we've got the extra embryonic membrane deriving from the trophoblastic layer. We've got the amnion, which makes the amniotic fluid, and then here you can see all the placental vessels. So the placental vessels are here, and the chorionic villi are the fetal part of the placenta, and that mixes with and works alongside the endometrium of the female. But remember that the blood does not mix. The blood cannot mix because they are different genetics. This BioNinja clip shows this quite nicely, I think. And what we need to come back to is, what's the role of the placenta? Well, the role of the placenta is for exchange, and we've got exchange of gases. So carbon dioxide is going to move from the maternal tissue through the chorionic villi into the capillaries, and then it's going to come back up to the fetus via the umbilical vein, and that will then deliver the oxygen for the fetus to do respiration. The fetus is going to produce carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide moves along the umbilical artery, and then again we get diffusion into the mother's blood. But as well as the movement of gases, and as well as this acting as the fetal lung, it's acting as the fetal digestive system. So we've got the exchange of nutrients. Nutrients from the female's blood, the mother's blood, are going to move across the chorionic villi into the blood vessels here to be taken and delivered to the baby so that it can undergo the processes of growth and its own metabolism. Another thing, so it's acting as the digestive system, it's acting as the lung, it's also acting to remove waste like bilirubin, which is a breakdown product of bile, as you already know from option D. So it's acting as an excretory surface as well. And one last thing, antibodies. So if the mother has any kind of microorganism in her blood, she's going to raise an immune response and produce specific antibodies. Now, the antibodies circulating are also going to move across the placenta to the fetus, and that's going to give the fetus passive immunity. The fetal immune system doesn't develop until after birth, so that's very, very important. So we've got the movement of all sorts of exchange between the fetus and the mother taking place. And here we've got, again, you can read this for yourself and add to your notes. So we've got the function of the placenta acting as the digestive system, the respiratory system, the excretory system, the immune system, and we've also got the idea that the placenta is acting as an endocrine organ as well. The placenta starts to produce high levels of progesterone and estrogen to prevent the breakdown of the endometrium when the HCG hormone starts to decrease. If we look at this idea here, we need to think about why the structure of the placenta allows it to do its function. So again, it's that mantra, structure, function, structure, function. So if you look at this, it will remind you, I hope, of ideas that we've met before in terms of digestion and in terms of gas exchange. We've got this idea of thin membranes, a short diffusion distance. By the way, when your mother was pregnant with you, she became slightly diabetic, elevating her blood sugar levels, and that will allow sugar to shunt across here. So after you've watched this video, go and give your mum a hug because she went through a lot just for you. So again, this is a summary here of the structure of the placenta and how it works to function. The only thing we've got left to do now is to consider birth.